recording.
Computer.
So everything is set up here, and Denise, you can also double check if it's going to show on Facebook in 10 seconds delay or something like that. I'll go live in 30 seconds or so.
Yeah, and I mean, once we go live,
The floor is yours. I
we
will
can wait
submit
a
you a
bit so
co-host.
that people join on. Don't have to start immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll just wait for your cue.
All right. I wonder
Yeah.
if I should play music. No, it's a little late. Let's just put it on. So let us know when you're going live.
I
Yousuf.
shall go live. I'll click live right now. And I'll tell you when it's there on Facebook. Actually, let me get my cell phone. Yeah, I think we're live.
Okay. So we're gonna just wait for people to join. For those who, I don't know, Yousuf, can you see if there are any eyes yet? So I can say hi.
So far, it's just begun. I think in a few minutes it should be fine.
Right.
I think I like the video myself to get more traction.
You would? Oh, you like the video?
All of a sudden we're inundated because of that one like. Love it.
Okay, we've got 5-6 people, but we can wait a couple more minutes maybe and just.
Yeah, cool. I mean,
the good thing is
like
they can
their
also go
eyes,
back.
their eyes. Yeah. So at least when I start introducing, there's somebody I'm speaking to. But this is gonna live on our pages, and so people can listen back to this and garner from it as much as they want, Use what you use.
Yep.
Don't use what you don't use. But I really trust that this is gonna be a very insightful conversation with you, Rumina. I'm excited to share your knowledge and share your heart for this, really.
Yes.
This kind of work. Yeah. Yeah, it being Black History Month, I've been sitting in a lot of meetings and events, and not only actually Black History Month, it's just the climate we're in, the season we're in, where this has gone past being a hot topic to a point where it's like people are really being inundated with it. And particularly those that identify as experts in it. I had a meeting today with a few experts at Western School in the faculty, and as much as they were saying like there's a lot, like people all of a sudden we went from 0 to 100 in terms of requests for stuff on EDI, stuff on racism, stuff on, but they're also a bit wary that people are afraid to come to them now about stuff because they're feeling like, oh, we're so inundated. And they're like, rather come to us than do stuff about us without us, And so I thought that was such a great comment that they made. But having you on here, I think is another avenue for us to actually offload a little bit of that pressure, where people are looking for places to learn more, where people are looking for more support, where people are just looking also for community. And so I'm going to throw in a plug here as the Racial Equity and Inclusion Commissioner for SOGS, that hey, reach out, let's form community. We have communication on Discord. We have our advocacy SOGS page. So if you're not watching this on our Advocacy SOGS page, then please go to our Advocacy SOGS page and like that page too, because we have a lot of events coming up during Black History Month. And yeah, we want to get engaged. We want to build community. I am going to get started.
Okay,
Are we good, Yousuf?
Absolutely.
With more
Go
eyes?
ahead. Yeah. You do.
Okay. Right. So this is Living in the Margins, which is an initiative by the SOGS commissioners, an initiative that we hope to carry on with the different, the different roles that commissioners have. So we have a Pride Commissioner, we have a Gender Concerns Commissioner, Indigenous Peoples Commissioner, and Accessibility Commissioner. And so we will be doing some more events with Living in the Margins with the series. But today we have Rumina Morris, who is an anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion coach, counselor, consultant, psychologist, and we just go on. And yeah, she has graciously agreed to be with us here to tackle a topic that she is very, very passionate about, and has her own, experience within in her own unique way. And I'm actually gonna allow you, Rumina, to maybe just tell us about what you do, and why you're so passionate about this. What has gotten you to this place?
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for having me. And thank you for the work that you're doing. This is such a, as you were saying, this is such a necessary conversation. And any place and any space that we can kind of come together and speak about things that we have been experiencing is always, it's always good to out it. There's a whole piece around healing that requires us to talk about our experiences. So yeah, by way of introduction, I'm actually not a psychologist. I am a social worker though, registered psychotherapist. So I do race-based trauma therapy. That is the angle that I take in my therapeutic relationships with people. To me, it's inherent to the work. It is incumbent upon me to see people within their social locations. So as a social worker, that is how I work with people and engage with them. But I also am absolutely an anti-racism, equity, inclusion consultant. So I do work with leaders. I do some leadership coaching to try and further this conversation. And as you were saying, there's a newer appetite for it. We are absolutely past the stage of sort of understanding that racism is a thing, and it's more the conversation has shifted to what are we going to do about it. And so, yeah, I've taken my background as a social worker. I worked in child welfare, and child welfare is one of the most oppressive systems, alongside all the others, policing, healthcare. And so I began to do anti-oppressive work within that context, recognizing the harm that was happening to children and families from racialized groups, disproportionately to other families. And so that's where I really got my feet wet in terms of advancing equity work. And I was a manager in a children's aid society. So I was very aware of the fact that there's a lot of things that happen in those areas around unconscious biases with workers who are going out to make assessments on children and families. But as a leader, I also recognize how much of the system is at play and how much the system actually supports inherent racism. When I was doing this work in that context, it was not welcome. It was not welcome at all. And I was the only racialized person in the organization. And so, there's a whole piece to that in terms of psychological safety that it just wasn't an environment that was open to really understanding that. Today is different. Today, I think there's an acknowledgement that we have to do better and that leaders need to really take charge of this in terms of their organizations and their systems. And so I'm happy to sort of support organizations. I'm very much a both and person. So for me, as much as I work with leaders and I work with organizations and sort of unpacking their own biases that are affecting their systems and their policies, at the same time, I recognize that while that is a very slow process for many people, I also need to support those who are being racially harmed. And so today I really want to sort of talk about how racism harms us. To contextualize, that's my work experience and that's sort of the lens that I bring in terms of being a social worker. I think to have a really good understanding of people and human behavior and systems and how culture plays a part of our daily life. I identify as a South Asian person, so I identify as racialized. And in saying that, I also recognize how much privilege I have in my identity. And so there's been a lot of reckoning for me in this last year with all of the spotlight on racial injustice, particularly anti-Black racism, which lives and breathes within South Asian communities and other communities. And my own lived experience, my husband identifies as Black. He is Nova Scotian Canadian, has been here for generations, and so often deals with many microaggressions about what it means to be a Canadian for many generations, because people often assume that you must be from somewhere else if you don't look white. And so I have 4 children, and my children are obviously mixed race. And the way that I really use that to help people learn and understand about race and how it plays out is that when I explain race as a social construct, people often don't understand that, because we've been taught, I certainly was taught when I was in school, that race is biological, that there are phenotypes, and this is completely a biological thing. And when you have children that are mixed race, particularly if they are half Black, that doesn't hold, because when they go out in the world and they step out onto the street, there is nothing about them that is South Asian. They are identified as Black. And as a mother of children, where I am like, but they are half this, it doesn't matter. When they go out on the street, they have to behave in a certain way, because they will be assumed to be Black by police, by teachers, by principals. That is going to be their lived experience. And so when I try to explain the concept of race being a social construct, I really try to hone it into as simple as that. Physical features are not, or physical makeup is not what defines race. It is literally how people perceive you. And so it helps to sort of contextualize, I hope for you, why I feel like I'm qualified to speak about this, both from my own experience as being racialized and having experienced racial trauma, without a doubt. I have lost jobs literally for speaking up about microaggressions in the workplace, and also have been in positions of power and leadership and privilege, and have been able to affect harm on others if I wasn't aware of what I do. And it matters for me, obviously, because of my family, but also because I recognize that in the absence of people speaking up for other marginalized communities, we're never going to get this conversation really moving. So that's essentially who I am and why I am very impassioned about this topic.
Thank you. Yeah. So we had a quick conversation yesterday, and in that conversation, I was the day before yesterday, and I was like, Rumina, I need you to know that this is Black History Month. And so you're not Black. And we need to really speak about that. We need to make sure that you situate yourself in this. And for me, I immediately had a sense of comfort, because man, what greater love than a love of a mother, right? And what greater needs to understand, and seeing that urgency to understand the experiences that your children are going through, that you may never ever be able to identify with, or never be able to like fully experience, or and so yeah, thank you for situating, thank you for doing that. So I know that a lot of us are in different places in this conversation. I think about myself, I am an immigrant, and this is a completely new conversation for me when I speak to people back at home. Granted, I'm from Botswana, and our context, our colonial legacies are different. However, it doesn't change the fact that we're still a lot further behind in the conversation. And there's so much to learn, and it's so much to learn because of the way that the systems, how history has been taught to us, how there's just so many systems. Where do you start? So when starting this work for everybody, to get everybody in the same level, like where do we start? How do you start to explain firstly how we even got here?
The answer for me is part of what you just talked about, and that's colonization. If we don't acknowledge and understand the role that colonialism has played in all of our lives, how do we situate ourselves in the conversation as it relates to today? So I identify myself as a daughter of colonization. My journey, my ancestors are from India, but we were displaced and moved to East Africa. and Kenya, sorry, not Kenya, Uganda and Tanzania. And my family was brought over as indentured slaves. And indentured servitude, I didn't even understand what that was until I had to research my own history. But essentially, it's slavery with an end date. It's a contract, and you're indebted to the employer until your service is done. And as true European colonizers, always building railways, that was part of the journey that my family took to East Africa. In that place, they were not obviously native to that land. And so racism was inherent to everything that happened in that one place of the world. With white people being superior because they were the colonizers, and then the South Asians being those model minority who were able to establish themselves in that country where they were not native. And then the native, indigenous Black people were at the bottom, were our servants, were our cleaners, were our housekeepers, continue to be to this day. Post-colonization, and this is true for so many countries across the world, out of 54 countries in Africa, only 2 were ever left alone and were not colonized, and not because they weren't attempted to be colonized. 2 countries out of 54 were not colonized. So that means that 52 countries have gone through very similar experiences to what my family did in terms of the decolonization. In Uganda, it ended up that, you know, they were evicted, they were kicked out, they were asked to leave. All South Asians must go. Because now that we're decolonized, or now that we are we've got independence, now all the systems are falling apart. And so the idea was that South Asians need to leave. So my parents were political refugees and had to go to England. I was born in the UK. Now I'm going further away from my ancestry. And I grew up in England in a place that was very white, Cambridge, very academic, very privileged. And learned how to survive in a place that was definitely not made for people like myself. And then by virtue of connecting with our other family members who came here, we then joined Canada. So I'm an immigrant as well, but I am through a flow of countries that, you know, we really had no say in this matter. My point is that's just one family, one experience, right? And when you look at the entire globe and what colonization, how it happened throughout the West Indies, how it happened in Canada, we cannot talk about racism, anti-racism, or anything if we don't understand our own personal histories and then the history of our country. So when we talk about colonization in Canada, we are talking about theft of land, of people, annihilation of people, displacement of people, which continues today. So the conversation that people often like to have, and we haven't even talked about the US and their legacy, but we can stay right here in Canada and talk about what has happened here. People are still trying to wrap their head around the fact that there was slavery in Canada because we've been fed a myth, right? That this was the land of the free. People came from the States and the Underground Railroad to freedom in the North. No, they didn't. They came to another place that wasn't designed for them. And so we are now living with the effects of that. And we're not talking generations and generations and generations ago. We're talking the other day, right? I mean, when we look at our history, when we look at how 1967 is when racialized people were allowed to immigrate to Canada. 1967. Until then, if you were racialized, you could only come here if we needed you for labor. When we talk about residential school system and people will think, oh, you know, that's just so long ago. The last one closed in 1996. I don't know about you, but that's in my lifetime. So we're not talking, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. It started hundreds and hundreds of years ago, but we're living with the repercussions of that today. And so whenever I start, it starts with the foundation. We cannot start in the middle. We have to start at the beginning of how we got here so that we can understand what we need to do to course correct at this point.
Okay. So that being said, then I feel like right now, a lot of things are pretty hypersensitized. Like we're almost looking for it, you know, and like you had said before, you wouldn't speak about it, you wouldn't bring it up because it hushes the whole room or your job's on the line, or at this point, like we're always almost looking for it. But I feel like there's still places where racial trauma does show up and we haven't recognized, or we haven't been able to name it. And so I just wonder, maybe from your experience, how have you seen racial trauma presenting itself or arising? How does one recognize that, I just went through something traumatic and that's racial trauma? right there.
Well, and it's not necessarily, we think of trauma as a one incident often, right? When we talk about it just in general, we think about traumatic events, something horrific, a horrible car accident, and there's a trauma event. And absolutely that has an impact on us. When we're talking about racial trauma, it's not necessarily one thing. It's many, many, many things. It's a lived experience from the beginning. So let's talk about from birth, right? So when a woman who is Black, identifies as Black, and walks into a hospital to deliver her baby, trauma starts right then, from the minute that baby is born. Why? Because the physician and the nurses are all using their unconscious biases. And we know in healthcare that it starts with the idea that Black people don't experience pain in the same way. This is evidence. We have lots of research that tells us that still today, this is an understanding. So it starts from jump. When people are in racialized bodies, the harm that starts to happen. When you are living that way, always, when you navigate every system, education, healthcare, we can't avoid, education, we tend to, everybody tends to participate in to some degree, and you experience lots of microaggressions, lots of harm. It shows up in multiple ways. So sometimes it is happening to us, right? Somebody constantly asking you, where are you from? No, where are you really from? Need to situate you because you can't be from here. That's racial harm, ongoing. I'm always having to prove myself, right? When you have a name that isn't easy to pronounce and you are constantly having to course correct people and to help them to understand that's not my name, this is how you say it. It's another dent, it's another ding. But also we do it to ourselves, because we can't talk about colonization without talking about Eurocentrism and understanding that this plays out in racialized communities in a very, very tragic way that creates further harm. And I'm not talking about our white oppressors. I'm talking about our mothers and our fathers and our aunties who tell us, ooh, you're going to go out in the sun? You're going to get really dark. This is internal oppression. This is constant messaging about the darker your skin, the worse, the uglier you are, the kinkier your hair, the less beauty you have. This goes to things like when you do experience racial harm. So even as a child, when I was bullied, I got called all kinds of names that I won't repeat here. When I would go back and cry to my mother, the response would be, don't worry about it. Stop. Don't say anything. They're just jealous. These kind of things reiterate in the workplace, right? When you think, oh, I think this isn't okay, what somebody said. And then you sort of get the feedback from the people around you saying, keep it quiet, head down. New immigrant parents are very, very well known to do this to their children, because they are so grateful to be here, because often they are coming from not just beautiful sunny vacation spots, they're coming from decolonized countries. So when we talk about where people are coming from to join Canada, and often are fleeing countries that are still reverberating from the harm of colonization, let's be real. When they come here, they are so grateful to be in a better opportunity place where they can perhaps have more opportunity for financial growth or whatever. That turns into, shush, be quiet, don't say anything, don't rock the boat. We need to just keep our head down, go do your 9 to 5 and come back. And so we internalize that. So it shows up in many, many ways. The harm is repetitive. It is from everywhere. There is no escape. If you enter into an interracial relationship, you're dealing with race on an ongoing basis. If not with your partner, then with their family. If you are in a workplace where you are not the majority, you're not part of the dominant group, you are constantly checking yourself. Should I speak up? Will they misinterpret? And I'm talking about even just stereotypes, right? So how many women I work with who identify as Black, and I do this work alongside, and they will speak up. And then they will get the stereotype of, oh, she's angry. Oh, there's another angry Black woman. So even speaking just truthfully has to be sort of tempered down. I want to be careful what I say. It might affect my promotion. All this day in, day out equals harm. And it is a traumatic response in our body. So it's never one thing. It's a multitude of a lived experience that creates this racial harm.
So I know this wasn't in like the agenda that we had spoken about, but I read it yesterday. So there was an article in the Harvard Business Review on imposter syndrome. And basically the article was saying, we need to stop saying that. We need to stop telling women they have imposter syndrome, because that's not what it is. It is not made up in their minds. There's a system that they are pushing against, and that has made it. And so I had a quick debate with my one of my friends over this. And please, guys, don't at me. I get things wrong. But my argument was, and perhaps you can help me also think through it and maybe help other people who maybe read that article. My argument was, I feel the imposter syndrome is self-imposed in the sense that I haven't heard anybody tell somebody you have imposter syndrome. I hear people saying, I have imposter syndrome. So you have decided that you acknowledge the systems, but you have decided to believe the systems. And so for me, the work needs to be your personal war, your personal fight to silence that voice, and not always shift and blame things. And not to say that these things shouldn't be tackled at the same time. We need to attack the systems, but there's also a personal war that we need to go through. Am I wrong? Am I wrong in thinking that way? Am I?
No, I mean, I think you're 100% right. It is internal. And it's another way of describing the idea that I'm not good enough or that I don't belong here. But imposter syndrome, as we know it, and I agree, I actually don't believe it is a thing. I think it is internalized oppression that is at play. And for women, there's a whole gender piece to that. And for racialized people, there's a whole piece to that. And you add every other intersectionality on that, and it goes deeper and deeper. But it's not coming from nowhere. It is coming from messaging that is coming from our family, it is coming from our education, it is coming from our media, it is being reinforced everywhere we go. How many white men, able-bodied, cisgendered white men, talk about having imposter syndrome?
Never heard it.
Me neither, because they are not imposters. This is their world. This is their land to play on. This is the system that was created for them, and that's why. So imposter syndrome is kind of a bogus way of saying I've internalized all kinds of things and I have believed them to be true. And as I said, if it's coming from your own mother, if it's coming from your own grandmother, if it's coming from everywhere you look, when you open up a textbook at school and it doesn't speak to your history, the truth, then it is going to become internalized. Who's there to check it? And so it's almost like swimming upstream to undo it. It's very, very difficult, and it requires all kinds of consciousness. And to be fair, this is something I talk about all day. I live it, I breathe it. I'm very aware of this because it's my life's work. I have a conversation with my sister who came from the same womb as me, and this is not her life's work. This is not her thought all day, every day. And that's two people from the same family. So we have to acknowledge that there are people who are very attuned to this and are very, very cognizant of the bigger picture and how the system is at play. But there are way more people who have just learned to live with it and don't even know that there's an alternative, right? So I don't know what it is to live and walk in a place where everybody looks like me. My teachers, my media, everywhere I go, people look like, I have no idea what that is. Where you come from, Denise, that's the complete opposite. Complete opposite. So you didn't become a Black woman until you walked onto Canadian soil. Complete reverse understanding, right? And so whatever, but in spite of that, the internalized stuff that you would have dealt with from where you have come from is still rooted in colonization and is still rooted in this hierarchy of races. So we are all, no matter what's happened and where we've come from and where we are today, some of us are more attuned to this and some are not. I think by talking about it and outing it and calling it what it is and saying how it is impacting us is freeing a lot of us. But I think for so many people, we didn't even know that there was any alternative. I mean, I often in therapy will kind of play with the idea of, can you just imagine what it would be to have your social location, your identities showing up everywhere you go and messaging from jump, as it has been for white men, that you are worthy, that you are deserving, that there is a place for you at the table, that we need you, we want you. I mean, we have learned to navigate an entire world that tells us the complete opposite. So imposter syndrome, I'm parking it. I call it, it's internalized oppression. And until white men start saying they have it, I'm not buying it. It's not that. It's not that.
I love that. I think while we're still speaking, while we're still on this topic of like the systems and white men, there was a question that was submitted, and it goes, does racism against white people exist? So I feel like that's a nice question to like really address the system.
So in order to answer that, we have to talk about what racism is. Right? Okay. What is it? And you cannot use the language of racism without talking about power. Those two are inherent. Mm-hmm. Stereotypes, discrimination, racial slurs, sure, anyone can throw those out. But when we're talking about racism, the ability to oppress other people, it has a power piece to it. I don't know about you, but I don't have power in this society. I do know about you, neither do you, right? We know who holds the power. The dominant group is white. The dominant group is men. They are in positions of power. They are our leaders. They are our government. They are our academic institutions. They are our CEOs of every system and situation that we have. So racism requires there to be a piece of power in it. So no, absolutely not. There is no way for me to uphold racism when I don't have power myself. So racism towards white people is not a thing. Ignorance, discrimination, maybe a little bit of stereotyping. That absolutely. I can think all kinds of stereotypes are sort of the thoughts, right? Stereotypes of what you think about people. So I can think ill things of any group, but I don't have the power to keep them down, to keep them marginalized, to keep them at bay, to keep them out of my workplace, because I am the minority in my workplace. How can I have power? And to be fair, a reminder that I have privilege. So I have been in positions of power, but at the end of the day, the limited power that I have doesn't affect any change. So that is, it's such a rhetoric around, well, Black people can be racist or what? No, they can be biased. They can have their thoughts and their ideas about white folks, but in what capacity can they disproportionately take white children from their families? In what capacity can Black people put white people in jail, like from school to jail, pipeline, boom? We don't have that power. We are not positioned in society that way. And until that power balance changes, and I can guarantee you, when and if the power changes, we likely will not see the same level of harm happening to white people, because it's not inherent to our understanding of humanity. When you are marginalized, you have a different sense of humanity than when you are the oppressor, I think.
Hi, Rumina. I thought maybe I'll ask a question as well. Do you think some form of racism still could exist, say within the same race, for instance? I'm thinking, I'm, for example, from Pakistan, and it seems people can be rather, I'm using this quite, they could be rather mean-spirited, at least, when coming up with racial slurs, but, people often look quite similar. Do you think there's some form of racism between this internally?
So again, I wouldn't say it's racism necessarily, because racism inherently is speaking to the dominant group having power, but there is so much racism within our communities. So I identify as South Asian, you're Pakistani. My background is quite ignorant towards Pakistani people. Say mean things, we say unkind things. I was raised Muslim, so we would say very unfortunate things about people who are Hindu. Don't go to their homes. We don't eat from we don't eat food from their home. These ridiculous things. So we can be very biased, and that's bias though, and that's sort of playing up on stereotypes. We can internalize a lot of things like that. But in terms of it actually being racist, we don't have the power even within. So that's where it's internalized, and that's where it becomes sort of this othering. And if I can just acknowledge that doesn't happen by accident, right? There's a whole piece that, like, inherently, if we go back, every one of us, all three of us from different parts of the world, if we go back to our ancestors, to our indigenous land, this wasn't happening. This isn't how we engage with one another, right? When you go to indigeneity of any part of the world, there's a whole understanding of how humanity and respect of the earth and working symbiotically with each other and with the earth is all inherent to sort of how we've lived. Colonization has disrupted all of that. And part of colonization has required all of our groups to pit one against one another. So when I say that there's anti-Black racism within the South Asian community, it wasn't inherent to us. This is not how we just came out of the womb and, oh, we don't like Black people. It has been fed to us. We have bought in the narrative because it's been sold to us that Black people are less than. Look at them, they were slaves. Now we are starting to understand, no, they were not slaves. They were people, they were doctors, they were farmers, they were people first, and they were enslaved. Well, that changes everything. Now the onus is on those who enslaved. But without understanding that, and when we buy things because it's sold to us in that way, we inherently start to internalize it and start to realize, oh, they're different. Oh, they're different. And we make these negative stereotypes about them. But in terms of really it being racism, Yousuf, I'm going to say no, because racism has to have, the dominant group has to be in a place of power. Now, we go to the South Asian community, and there's definitely things like the caste system that keeps certain people in their place. We know this, but again, this is when we're talking about racism in the way that we're understanding it, we're really talking about oppressors and oppressed, and people needing to keep people on the margins in order to further and allow certain people to rise to the top. So there's pieces of it within our different communities, but I would argue that that is a result of this being fed into this lie and this myth that there is a hierarchy of race.
Thank you.
So I want to speak to, I would like you to touch on the concept or the idea of microaggressions. And I say this because I feel that I honestly believe that microaggressions are an absolutely amazing tool to silence. And without us recognizing where we're being silenced, we won't recognize where to actually push through and push past and make sure our voice is heard, or make sure that we are seen. And so I'd love you to just speak to this idea of microaggressions, and also if you could throw in there, and this also comes from one of the comments that was submitted, but if you also could throw in there how microaggressions are typically come across, as in maybe some examples of a microaggression, so we can kind of contextualize things.
Yeah, and microaggressions are a funny one, and there are nuances, right? You can have micro insults, microaggressions, and so let's just unpack it in terms of what they are, and they are often housed in good intent. So they often come in a package of like, well, I didn't mean that, I didn't mean it that way, okay? So which makes it harder to catch it, and it makes it harder to call it out, because we often know that people don't necessarily mean it that way, that it is their ignorance. And it needs to be differentiated when people are curious and when it's a microaggression, right? And I mean, I wish that there's so many stereotypical microaggressions, and I almost laugh when people share with me in the work that I do examples of microaggressions, and it literally is the same cookie cutter one. So the number one, where are you from, right? Have to know where you're from. Now, white people don't ask white people, where are you from? Unless they have an accent. It just doesn't happen. So, and so when you ask me, where am I from? I just told you my story. What do I say? Right? Oh, I'm from England. Well, that doesn't help you at all. It's not what you're asking, because I don't a birthright is not really, it shouldn't be England. So what do you want to know? Well, my parents are from East Africa, used to be how I would answer. Well, what does that tell you? Well, you don't look black. It's because I'm not black. Okay. So my ancestors are from India. So it's a whole story, right? But what's the point of that question is you don't belong here, is the insinuation. So we're saying, where are you from? What we mean is, what are you doing here and how did you get here? Okay. Another very common one. You speak English so well. Not to me. I don't get that a lot because I grew up in England. But people who have an accent or who come from a different country and speak English quite okay, often will get, oh, you speak really well. The insinuation is that you would not be able to speak English. English is spoken all over the world. Things like comments about people's names, as I said, that's another big one. Oh, that's too hard to say, I'm just going to shorten it. And because of all the things that I just talked about and how we have tried to learn to navigate in the world, as you said, Denise, it often silences us. It often puts us in a place where I don't know if I should say something. Can I? What will happen if I do? And so if I say to somebody, well, what do you mean by where am I from? What are you really asking me here? I didn't mean it that way. I was just wondering. Okay, but why is it the first thing that you asked, right? So sometimes people will say to me, well, I'm just really curious about people. I'm genuinely, I love to travel, and I really am wanting to know about where people are from. If that's true, it would never be the first thing you say, right? If that's true, it would come up in conversation as we're getting to know one another. And it's not that I don't want to share. I just blurt it out everywhere that my ancestors are from. It's not that I don't want to share. I think it's important for you to know so that you understand me. But it is so obvious to those who are receiving the microaggressions when they are coming from a genuine place of curiosity, and when they are coming from a place of, I need to other you. And so there's a whole layer of this that I think gets lost in translation with people going to, I'll tell you actually a newer one that I'm getting since I've come to London. And it's still the where are you from? But I moved to London 3 years ago. And what I find here is the where are you from is often not about like, where are you from all the way back? What are you doing in London is really what the question is, because Londoners don't look like you. So I'm from Brampton, like I moved to Brampton when we emigrated to Canada. I lived in the GTA. So Londoners now want to understand, what big city are you from? Because racialized people don't come to London or are not inherent to London, right? There's this whole idea that you must be from some other city. So it's a little nuanced microaggression, but it's the same conversation of like, what are you doing here? Or what brought you to London? I don't know. What brought you to London? It's a great city. Why is this a conversation? And is this something that you say to every white neighbor that you have? No, you need to know, what are we doing here? So microaggressions are very harmful, very insulting, but they can often be guised. I've had people say, and in terms of responding, that silencing piece is a huge reality. And I have literally been guilty of, I was at a party recently, and not recently, literally a year ago, actually, was the last thing I did before the pandemic hit, like the day before. I think it was February 29th. And I was at a party where a white woman who I'm on the same, academic kind of level. We do the same kind of in child welfare. And her partner was South Asian. And so when I had shared with her, because I got the question of like, what are you doing here? How did you get here? So I identified that I had moved from Brampton, and her joking response was, oh, Bangladesh, which is a common way of speaking about people from Brampton, because Brampton is so populated with South Asian people. And I was caught off guard because her partner was South Asian. And I did the kind of look at him like, are we doing this? Are we gonna laugh about this? And I didn't say anything. But to this day, it bothers me to no end that I didn't say anything, and B, that she thought it was okay to say that. Right? And I know if I asked her, she would have said, I was just joking. My partner's South Asian. But the impact on me was, it was so derogatory, and it's something that I know white people say, and never in a beautiful way. They're never saying it in a way that it's such a lovely thing. It's always in a derogatory way. So it's another cut. And when you see somebody who you think would know better, it wounds a little deeper. So microaggressions are a tough one because they just add layer upon layer of insult.
Okay, so there was another question. Yep. I'm going to read out the question, and then I think Yousuf and I may actually also try answer this question, but you can also, I would actually like you to start with answering it, but you don't need to speak to the school part about it. Okay. So the question is, how do you push for department-wide EDI-related change in core areas of teaching and research with no power as a student and a resistant faculty? So maybe you could speak to perhaps that tapping into or navigating the no power aspect of things, and then Yousuf and I can talk about some of the initiatives with the university.
Yeah, that would be great. So in terms of the no power, so there is truth to that in terms of, as a student, how much power do you have? But where the power comes in is in numbers, right? Who's paying the tuition fees if not the students, right? So where is that revenue coming from? So again, we have been very, very accustomed to pitting against one another, fighting for our own bits of the pie, and so there's an opportunity today where collective voice is that much more deafening. And we know that there's an appetite for that. And we have allies, right? We have lots of white people who are like, you know what, I'm tired of this as well. I see the pain that it's causing. This is not the way that I want to see the future. So collectively, there's a lot of power. And I think that pressure there's never been a better time. Compared to what I was doing, one person in a sea of white people is a very different experience than when collectively there is pressure put on. and accountability. And there has never been a more, as much as people, as you said at the beginning, this is a very different time to do this work and to put that pressure on. And people have made statements, right? And you'll probably talk about this, but every organization who has a bit of humility has put out a statement on anti-racism in some way, shape, or form. What they've done about it may be very limited. In spaces I often work in, there's been nothing done. But there is an opportunity to be accountable for what they have said. And so I would frame it in that sense: collective power, getting our allies on board to be able to speak truth to power. And there, where can people turn at this point? I really do feel like the more pressure we can put on, the better, because there is no escaping this. It's not an add-on anymore. It's not a bonus. It's not if we have time, if we have money. We're talking about human rights. Like, let's just strip it down. We're talking about human rights and dignity. So where are people going to run now that we're able to talk about it, right? The problem was we were silenced for too long. Now that we can talk about it, we can put the pressure on and we can put accountability on the table. So, but yeah, I would love to hear what's happening.
I actually want to say something before we answer that question, if that's okay, Yousuf. There's something that bothers me a lot around this idea of allyship and allies. So in conversations that we have been having with faculty members and committees or groups that are trying to actually do work in this, there's constantly bringing up this idea of having white allies in the classroom that could say you need somebody to walk to the provost office or wherever it is that you would report this, to walk with you so they can stand in solidarity. Or for me, I'm struggling with the position and where allies should be and what they should be doing. And this also comes back to the idea that when we look at decolonizing and when we look at we want to be the ones to decolonize. We don't need another hero complex coming in. Like, who's and yeah, so I'm a little shaky on the position of allies and where they should be. And I don't know if you could speak to that. Where I stand is allies should be amplifying voices, not giving voice. We already had voice.
Yeah.
Not amplifying. But yeah, so I don't know if you could just.
Well, I said allies because I know that it's something that people understand, and it's language that is out there. In my work, I actually don't typically use that because of what you just said. And so I prefer the term accomplice. Accomplice means you're rolling up your sleeves, you're getting in the dirt, you're taking one for the team, you take a bullet. It is not speaking for, it is shielding the bullet. It is absolutely getting dirty and calling out truth to power alongside and with permission of others. So there's an absolute role for white folks. Like, this is because you're right, we have a voice, but they have the power. And so to me, it's back to both, and we need to be able to speak our truth about the harm that it is affecting, and they need to speak truth to their own people, if you will, to understand what needs to be dismantled and how. So collectively, there's work to be done, and I think that's kind of what your worry is, that the work will end up being done by white folks for racialized people, and there's lots of work to be done, and everyone has to get their hands dirty. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the alternative to allyship to say accomplice, but maybe something else as well, because it has the connotation of being more engaged and active and playing a role. That's not just out of, oh, this is just my duty, I kind of have to do X, Y, and Z, but go well beyond and actually get this stuff done. I guess I would just add, and I completely agree about how powerful we are once we are together, I guess stronger together. I would just say that in my own experience, it's important to identify who the genuine allies are in a certain domain. For example, if you're concerned with faculty, identify those people that don't just take sort of notes, I hear you, I feel you, I see you, and goodbye. but actually take action that follow through and go well beyond the basic call of duty, and then work with them. And I think Denise and I have met so many new people who are like that, who go so well beyond. And I'm sure we're imagining some people, and it's important to stay in touch with them. But thank you, Rumina, for that wonderful new concept, although it might have a connotation of accomplice working together in a crime or something, but maybe we can find a more positive counterpart to that as well. Thank you.
I have a great article on that I can send you around allyship versus accomplice, and I'm a big believer. Yeah.
That is, yeah, I would love to read that. I mean, and I speak here as somebody who's also still learning. I speak here as somebody who's wrestling through so much, and don't have the answers. And I totally know that there's probably a lot of stuff that I said is like, yeah, that's not PC, Denise, all that. But like I said, I'm working through this myself. I really am.
That is part of it, is that we all are. We all are.
Yeah. So yeah, in terms of what's happening on campus and in terms of actually really trying to tackle those department-wide issues, we don't know. we're doing the work. There is a lot of work that is being done. I want to say that a lot of faculties have put together committees that are trying to do this work and trying to create a space where students can actually speak about this feeling of not having power, but also speak about trying to get more equity, more diversity, more inclusion in their syllabuses, in their work, in the research that they get to do, in the supervisors that they get to, you know, have work on their, so much. There's so much, and I hate it when this is said to me, but it's said a lot. It's a marathon, not a sprint. I hate it. Every time I hear that, I'm like, why isn't it a sprint? I wish it was a sprint. But I do know that there's a lot of work that's being done. We actually have an event on the 24th, which actually talks about being Black in the university. And we have people that are have graduated and have really become experts or specialized in looking at academia and looking at how to improve EDI in academia. And so I want to encourage people to come to that event.
Which event is that? Is that the
one on the 24th? Smiling racism.
Oh no, it's the 23rd, I think.
The 23rd?
Yes, I believe so. I'll double check.
Please do. Sorry guys. Yeah, but racism with a smile. Look out for that title.
I love the title.
It is. That's a great title. Yeah. So we have about 8 minutes left. Rumina, I don't know if there's anything you want to close off with. I think that for me, something I would like to hear is when talking to the women that you counsel, or even when you talk to your kids, like what do you say? Like what do you say as in how do you advise us to navigate through this current situation in terms of, I mean, one of the questions that was thrown in was, what do you do? How do you respond to somebody who throw some racial slurs at you in public, you know, but what's your advice for us going through life in this new season, with this new wokeness for everybody? Everybody is woke. But yeah, how do you suppose we navigate our own individual trauma as well?
That's a great question. And before I answer that, I'm also going to just speak to some of the things that are happening at Western, because I as a social worker, I'm part of the Ontario Association of Social Workers, and I have come to know some of the King's College students who are in the program, and they are really pushing back on some of the curriculum, and then some of the social work is such a white privilege sort of has a white privilege legacy, and are pushing back on some of the things that they're being taught. I also know that, I also do a deep dive anti-racism training curriculum with some other women here in London. And there are people from faculty at Western that are interested in taking that. And I think that's really indicative of that there is an appetite, and that there are, and it's white men that are coming and saying, hey, we know we need this. We need this for our staff. We need this for our faculty. So there are some shifts that are happening. They're really exciting to see. So things are starting, but I agree with you when you say the whole marathon sprint thing. The time was 100 years ago, and the fact that we're just waking up is very insulting to the experience of so many people. And so in terms of, the response, this is healing. This is healing. And if I had had opportunities to talk about this in my younger years, I often wonder what would have happened, how I would have saved so much additional harm, how I would have been protected in some way. So just being able to create spaces where we can acknowledge that this is harmful, or acknowledge what is happening, is very important. When it comes to calling things out and addressing situations, microaggressions, I just gave you an example of one that slapped me in the face and I did nothing. But not because I can't, not because I don't have the skill set, but because it's so much about when and where and how do you choose to do that. So if somebody's yelling a racial slur on the street, I don't know if it's the safest time to sort of confront them, right? So we have to talk about safety, because we know that the impact of racism can be deadly. Your life can be taken by virtue of the skin you're in. So I'm not a proponent of calling it out everywhere, screaming it up and down, because safety has to be a part of the conversation. And that's actually not going to affect a whole lot of change. You may just actually reinforce the stereotype of the angry Black person, or the Black man is violent sort of myth. So I'm not sure that that's necessary. Having said that, if you have privilege, then use it, right? So for example, at the Black Lives Matter, the protest that we had in London last summer, I think everyone knows there was one individual who was just really antagonizing the crowd. And I was there with my husband. And so I had power and I had privilege in that moment. And when I walked by him, and I just walked into the protest, and I saw his sign and I heard him ranting, and I didn't even give it a second thought, and I just screamed at him, "Get out of here, you're not welcome," right? Maybe not the safest thing to do, but I felt like I had a bit of privilege having my husband with me. Other people have shared since saying, oh, I would never have said anything. Because he yelled back at me like, we're all welcome here, and the whole thing. So safety is a big part of it. You can't just go out and assume that you can call this out. Where it is most effective is in the spheres of influence that you have within your family, within your friends, within places and spaces where people feel like they can be entering into these conversations in a nuanced way. So being able to sort of, what did you mean by that? Or unpacking even the impact. A lot of times, as we talked about with microaggressions, because it's housed in this like, oh, I didn't mean it, there's an opportunity there to sort of go, but what you need to understand is that the impact is as if you did, right? So you can't hide behind that, I didn't know, because now I'm sharing. So there's so many different ways. I think collective, as I've said, collective healing is necessary. So acknowledging that we've all been hurt and damaged by this allows for us to sort of call it for what it is when we see it. So there's internal work to be done, no question. There's also external work and pressure to be put on when appropriate and when safe. And again, I'm back to both and. It's internal and it's external, anywhere and everywhere that you can when it's safe to do so. That you have to also acknowledge when to quit it, when to not, when to let it go, because it will not affect change. There are so many people who are open to this conversation and who want to understand and want to know better and be better. Those are the people that you really want to tap into. There's a group of people that are never ever going to change their mind. They absolutely inherently believe, and many of them are in the United States, and but they live here too, right? Those people, those supporters all live here too. And so we're not really trying to tackle those folks. It's the others, because there's enough people, I think, today who are open to kind of, okay, I never thought about this. And that's when you can say white privilege allows you to never have thought about it. that is privilege at its best, to not have to think about. I'm able-bodied. I don't walk around the world always thinking, what's it like to go around in a wheelchair? I wonder if I could get in here. I don't think like that. That's my privilege. But when somebody I know who is close to me is in a wheelchair, or has been, even if it's temporarily, and all of a sudden I have to look at the world differently because of that, you become more attuned. So there's an opportunity for people to just understand, because a lot of people have had the privilege of not knowing the impact. So it's collective, working separately on ourselves and collectively together, is kind of the advice that I give. But it is a heavy emotional load to carry and to unburden ourselves from.
I guess, Denise, you wanted to say something?
No, I was just gonna say I absolutely love the just the idea of healing together, healing collectively, encompasses and everything.
It's so helpful when someone else just acknowledges that and lets you know, oh, I'm sorry that this caused harm. I didn't realize that. That alone at least begins the healing process with someone who's going through these experiences again and again and again, which in turn causes a kind of harm and impact for that particular person. And Rumina, I mean, I guess it's so important also to allow that conversation for people who may unintentionally cause harms, especially those people who would be willing to be, oh, I didn't realize that, you know what, I'll just stop and I'll think about this. And that's important. I just wanted to also just mention briefly some of the events that are related to our conversation today. So the first one is on 23rd of February. It's Racism with a Smile, Being Black at the University. It's a fantastic panel. And that information will be out soon as well. And our moderators will include our own Racial Equity and Commissioner Denise Kamyuka and Maria Nidju. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name entirely correctly, but I can ask her. And our panelists include Dami Laval, Chinelo Ezenwa, and Sarita Adi. So we're really excited about that. It's on 23rd of February, 4 to 5 p.m. Also, we have a couple more events. One is actually an anti-racist book club by Denise and Francesca, our Gender Concerns Commissioner. That's going to be on February 25th, 4:30 p.m. And finally, we have our very own Nicole Kaniki, who is going to give a talk on anti-racism, equity, diversity, and inclusion in higher education. This will be on the 25th from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. And you know what? It's been fantastic hearing. I think both of you were talking a lot and I was just listening a lot, but it was fantastic. And I hope all of the viewers enjoyed this. And hopefully we can continue this on a monthly basis or bi-monthly or something like that and see how things go. Denise, you want to say something else as well?
Something so funny has happened in the in the closed captioning when you're talking about Dami. The closed captioning said we're going to have Demi Lovato. Wow, that would be amazing.
On the Zoom captions, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, Black History Month. But Rumina, where can people get a hold of you? You do have a practice, and I'd love people who are looking for a therapist of color to actually reach out to. I know that's how I came across you, because I was desperately looking for help from somebody of color. So how can people reach out to you?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way is through my website, ruminamorris.com, or my email is rumina@ruminamorris.com. If you even go on Psychology Today, I show up there. And I'm certainly explicit about the work that I do. I am very clear that I do race-based trauma therapy for folks like ourselves. I really am serving people that have experienced racial harm and are trying to navigate spaces that were not created for them. So yeah, absolutely happy to support people with their journey, because this is a great space, and more places and spaces like this are helpful to do it together. And then sometimes the wounds are even a little deeper, and a little one-on-one support is necessary. And I'm absolutely happy to help with that.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
You.
Okay. I think we're gonna end it here.
Hmm.
But thank you everybody who was watching.
Yes,
Or who
thank
watches
you
it
everyone.
later.
Thank you, Rumina and Denise.
Yeah.
I'll turn this off in maybe 10 seconds because there's some weird delay or whatnot.
Oh, okay.
So let's just stare at each other for 10 seconds and do exactly nothing.
Let's do racism with a smile.
Oh, I can't. Yeah, that would be pretty. There are too many people like that.
Did you just do this?
All right, folks. Take care. Have a fantastic night.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, I stop this and I'll stop